Buenos días. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this great event on Chile. We have excellent news for Chile, for Columbia University, and for all the friends of Chile and Columbia University. We have a special welcome to Dean John Coatsworth, who's now the interim provost of Columbia and also the dean of the School of International Public Affairs. This is going to be a great day. We have lots of announcements, but first we have a great lineup here. Chair a panel discussion on Chile, on what's going on in Chile. Many of you have followed news about Chile in many areas. And we have a great lineup here of Columbia faculty who have been working in Chile for many years, who have written about Chile for many years, and who have ongoing projects in our country. So I'm going to turn it now over to Tom Trebat. He's the head of the ILAS. Yo no me presenté. I'm sorry. I'm Karen Poniatic. I'm Karen Poniatic. I am a former student of SIPA many years ago. That's 80-something. We won't say 89. And I'm delighted to be here. And I'm going to be the interim director of the Columbia Global Center in for Latin America in Chile. So, ¿también me presenté bien?
Ya, listo.
Okay, so your turn.
We'll have many opportunities to get to know Karen Poniacic, and on behalf of Columbia, we're very grateful that she is serving as our director of our new Santiago Global Center, which we inaugurate today. So I truly feel it's a special day here at the university. We thank all of you for coming. We thank Andronico Luksic for making the day possible, for his presence, Peter Morse as well. You'll hear more about them and about the plans we have. But it wouldn't make sense without both students interested in Chile and in the region, in its diversity, and of course without faculty also committed to the region, to Latin America. It is an important date, as yesterday, of course, we marked a very sad occasion, which has been followed, hopefully, a sad day of remembrance yesterday by a day of hope today. And I think in that spirit of hope and new beginnings, we gather our faculty today to consider a next, and I think a very historic move for Columbia University. As far as we know, I'll look for maybe some of the veterans in the audience to contradict me, but I don't think they will. The very first time the university itself has ever opened an office in Latin America. And it makes sense for many, many ways, in many respects, that this first office be located in Santiago, Chile, and that it have a regional vocation. Basically, you'll hear more about the center as the day proceeds. I don't want to take more time from the faculty, but what we envision is a two-way communication. Obviously, from Chile's point of view, what is being created is a Chilean organization based in Chile and interested in Chilean themes and Chilean issues and Chilean problems and Chilean opportunities, and obviously anxious to tap into the many resources of this wonderful, sprawling enterprise called Columbia University. But it's a two-way street. We also feel that those same problems and those same opportunities of the Chilean people are the problems and the opportunities of mankind and of humanity in general, and they should be known. People who are committed to their study, to teaching about them, should be welcome, and their ideas should penetrate and influence the way we think and the issues we study. So a two-way street begins today. And I'll just say in passing that I'm pleased to, obviously this is a venture of the Columbia University Global Centers, but I'm representing here the Institute of Latin American Studies, which is completing its 50th year. And with John Coatsworth, we wondered how could we fittingly commemorate the 50 years of the Institute of Latin American Studies, and I think the answer is given to us right here in this room this morning. My biggest job, first of all, it's very difficult, believe me, as the head of ILAS to gather faculty at any one event, and I want to thank them en masse. I'm going to introduce them very briefly. In fact, just with their titles, I can't get into their resumes in any depth, and I think they'll understand and forgive me for that. I'll introduce them in the order in which they are going to be speaking, I hope. I've posed two questions to them. I'd like them first to reflect upon Chile and maybe regional themes. Not everyone is an expert on Chile, although all are familiar with the country and the region. I've asked them to reflect from their disciplinary point of view what it is that interests them, what are the issues that motivate them, that they feel are important from their discipline. And you'll see they represent an enormous variety of disciplines of the university. And that'll be a sort of a first round. And then a second round, I'm going to ask them to be a little bit more practical and pointed. What difference does it make to them that there will be a global center for Columbia University based in Santiago? We'll see how far we get on that second round, given our time constraints. But that's how the panel is organized. And then we have illustrious members of the faculty. This is a real gathering. That's why I insisted that pictures be taken today to remember this. There's faculty members in the audience as well, and I'll be asking them to comment. But let me try now, maybe have to match up my list with the way in which my colleagues are seated. The first to speak will be Professor Miguel Urquiola, who is a professor in the Department of Economics at Columbia and also in the School of International and Public Affairs. Lisa Goddard represents a branch of the Earth Institute, another sprawling enterprise if there ever was one. Her field is climate. She's a senior researcher. Her field is in climate science. John Dingus, another of our Chileanists on the faculty, is Godfrey Lowell Cabot Professor of Journalism at the Columbia School of Journalism. Guillermo Calvo, who has come to us some few years ago from the Inter-American Development Bank, where he served as chief economist for Latin America and represents a neighboring country of Chile. He's a professor of economics, international and public affairs at the School of International and Public Affairs and directs our mid-career program in economic policy management. Nara Milanic, seated next to Guillermo, is the associate professor of history, specializing in Chilean history at Barnard College and at Columbia University. Nelson Freiman, representing yet another country in the region, and also more institutionally representing the Columbia Business School, where he is professor of professional practice in the area of decision, risk, and operations. So Nelson will be there, and then I'm very pleased to present maybe our only Chilean. No, if I'm wrong on that, but certainly Enrique Walker. Welcome, Enrique. Enrique Walker is associate professor at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. So I think right away you've sort of seen the diversity we can bring to bear. I think others, we didn't have a bigger room or a bigger table, there might have been more. But it's a privilege to welcome them. Miguel, I'd like you to start, if you wouldn't mind, with the first 5 to 8 minutes on reflections on Chile. Thank you, Miguel Urquiola.
Sure, thanks. Thanks very much, Tom. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning. Thanks for having me. So Tom has basically asked us to say why Chile is interesting to us from our disciplinary perspective. As an economist, of course, in a general sense, Chile is interesting because it's one of the countries that has most seriously taken the basic proposition that it might be a good idea to basically have free markets and competition help organize a large part of the economy. And Chile has been doing this for something like 30 years. And I think with some ups and downs, it has generally been a very large success. I think there are different ways in which one can measure this. And there are ways in which that might be very academic. And then there are also some rough and ready ways of measuring this. And I think that our being here this morning, as Tom said, is a real indicator that the country has been very successful in that way. Now, within economics, I basically work on the economics of education, and I would say that Chile is even more interesting to economics interested in education because it is the one country, perhaps, that has most seriously taken Milton Friedman's proposition that the same ideas of free market, of using the free market to organize the economy and to basically foster private participation. Chile is a country that most seriously took this issue in the education sector. Namely, in around 1981, Chile basically started using vouchers to fund schools, and it basically let parents choose which school their children should go on, and so forth. Now, if we look at how this has gone on, once again, we can look at rough and ready ways of assessing the success of this way of going about things, and we can see, if you read the Chilean papers every so often, this has ended in basically over the last few years a number of persistent and large student protests where basically students are asking for quality education for all and also for things like less private participation in education. And so I think that one of the reasons in which, let me be slightly more technical about that. What basically happened with the introduction of free market forces over 30 years in Chilean education has been two things. One is a lot of stratification, meaning the rich going to school with the rich and the poor with the poor. And unlike the effect of basically private participation and free market competition in the rest of the economy, which has basically produced a large average productivity increases and basically growth, which is part of the reason why we're here this morning, I think, it has not produced such large productivity increases within the educational sector. Namely, test scores in Chile, they're measured over time, have gone up very little, despite the fact that the country has spent quite a bit of money on education. So I think that one of the reasons that Chile is so fascinating is because it basically tells those of us who are interested in education, there's something different about this particular market. Unlike other markets where sort of free competition and private participation seems to produce such great outcomes, Chile, I think, is a country that crystallizes that this system of organizing things has some limit in this particular industry. I think that this presents a real puzzle for Chile. I know that it's certainly a puzzle, or I'm guessing it's certainly a puzzle for ministers and presidents trying to deal with these protests. But it also presents a puzzle, and this maybe gets back to the theme Tom said, for academics, because at the end of the day, what Chile did was basically largely implement what economists were saying should be done in this sector. And 30 years later, it is perhaps a good question for economists to say, well, where did our advice actually not go so well when it has gone well elsewhere? So one of the reasons I find Chile fascinating is that basically I've been trying to deal with that question. And there's no country that is a better place in the whole world that basically is a better place to see this question play out. I could go on about why I think things didn't go so well, and I think I have a couple of minutes, so let me state that briefly. And even though the stuff I've been doing on this are models and things that might be esoteric, the intuition is actually very simple and should be very simple to anyone who sits at a university like Columbia, which is what I'm trying to express in these models is basically that education is unlike other industries in the sense that the reputation of the firms which basically participate in this industry, and this is one of the firms that participates in this industry, is built very much on who buys from it, as opposed to, say, what value added or what productivity they have. So basically, Columbia's reputation cannot be disentangled from the fact that it takes in very good students. The reputation of the university, of the Catholic University in Chile, for example, which is one of the top universities, cannot be disentangled from the fact that it basically takes in the brightest students. And so this makes it different from, say, someone who's selling water, who basically says the quality of my good is somehow intrinsic to the good, and it can be judged easily by everyone, independent of who's drinking it. I might taste this water and that water and say, well, I like this one more, even though John is drinking the other, or something like that. But anyhow, this is going towards what I do. But I do think Chile is interesting because it basically crystallizes these questions, and hopefully there will be cross-communication in the future between economists thinking about such issues and the country as it tries to implement it. And as Tom said, this is partially maybe bridging part of what is an ivory tower enterprise of sort of looking at what might be working or not in civil society, and what is a pressing concern on the side of politicians and ministers trying to deal with how to improve education in a country like Chile. Let me stop there, Tom, so that I don't go over my time.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Appreciate that. Thank you. Turn to Lisa Goddard.
Thank you very much. I should say up front that I work very closely with Walter Böttgen, who is the director of Latin American and Caribbean programs at IRI, and he asked me to fill in. So some of the more institutional questions I'll defer, and folks can follow up with him. But I thought it would be useful just to give a little information on what IRI is, because I think it sets a context very well for what it is that we're trying to do and our interests in Chile. So the IRI stands for International Research Institute for Climate and Society. We're part of the Earth Institute. Maybe a half to two-thirds of us are climate scientists, and the rest of the scientists that work at our institution are involved in sectoral science and policy. So that could be agriculture, health, water resources, these various industries. And we're very interested in connecting climate information, climate science, climate predictions with those different sectors and decision making and informing policy that might be related to those decisions, might enable those decisions. And so a lot of our research really chooses locations that are amenable to this type of work. So there are a lot of places that are in need. Obviously, every place in the world is impacted by weather and climate variability, climate change, and in all of these countries, people have to make decisions, but some countries are much more amenable to the research and actually making progress on methodologies than others. Chile happens to be a really good setting for this type of work. They have some very important water resource issues with the glaciers and the rain-fed agriculture as well. In terms of agriculture, they're a very, very rich country, much like California to the north. And so the setting is very important. There's predictability of the climate in the region. That's very important to us as well, because if we can't say very much, then there's very little that people can do in anticipation. And we have very good partners. There's really excellent institutions in the universities, in the hydrology institutions in the country, and we've had a good interaction with some of the government agencies. And all of those things really help to bring things together. So we do have a couple of projects that are ongoing in Chile, and that's part of our active interest currently. We hope to grow that further. And these have been involved in both agriculture and water resources. The agricultural one, I would say, is a little bit more nascent. We've had some training exercises linking INA in Chile, which is the more commercial side of agriculture, with INA in Uruguay. And so the lessons, they're a little bit more advanced, INA in Uruguay, and so some of the lessons learned, some of the methodologies for monitoring the climate and the environment, and how to bring in, excuse me, how to bring in climate information to their interests and decisions, was a very productive workshop. And since then, we've put forward a proposal to bring in more innovative research into those decisions. The more advanced project that's actually quite exciting, and this year actually led to real on-the-ground, real-time decisions, has been with the region of Coquimbo and the Elqui River and water management decisions there. So it began with looking at drought prediction. Drought is obviously a very important issue in this semi-arid region. It's a place that's impacted by year-to-year variability with El Nino. They also have a lot of concerns, obviously, with climate change. And we've seen that this is also a place that's impacted by decadal scale variability. So decadal scale variability, natural to the climate system, is something that's very important to be able to quantify because of its impact on the realization of climate change and the sort of decisions that people are making that really are on more of a 10 to 20 year time scale. So bringing all of these things together, at the seasonal time scale, they've made some very specific, tailored seasonal forecasts for drought and rain-fed agriculture that are on a local scale, so that involves making predictions, making them relevant to local scale users, that impacts rural water and impacts agriculture, as well as working with hydrologists to get a better estimate for what the stream flow predictions are for the coming season, and that impacts a number of decisions. Mining, hydropower, urban water supply, and so working between the climate prediction, the hydrology, and then the water decisions. This year they actually put out a real-time forecast for stream flow, and that did impact the pricing of the water shares that are in the region. And this has been seen as a very successful project. And what we'd like to do is to expand that to other river basin areas. We'd like to also expand that to more of the rural community, help with the agriculture and interests in cattle, for example. But this has been a very good interaction throughout the chain of expertise, from the Colombia scientists to the Chilean scientists and the governmental officials. We would also like to expand our working relationships with some of these regional agencies. The universities, we've been very happy with our scientific collaborations with the universities in the region. And and also start to see to what extent the policy aspects might be influenced by having better information. Sometimes it's impossible to change policy decisions before they see that there's actually something concrete that they can pin it on. So these are the main issues that we're interested in. A number of time scales in the climate system, spatial scales in the climate system and the decisions, and then agriculture and water being very important issues in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I'll turn it now to John Dingus. Welcome, John.
Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Chile has been an area of incredibly intense involvement in almost my entire journalistic career, and 16 years ago when I came to Columbia University, it's been the main focus of my book writing and the projects that I run outside of the normal course of teaching journalism to people who are going to go work for newspapers and websites and television and radio stations. I lived there for 6 years, and given the dates of when I was there, it's pretty clear that my focus on Chile tends to bring me into the dark side of Chile. Chile is a country that has been of very intense interest to the United States in terms at various periods actual state interest. It was declared the showcase for democracy during the 1960s. It was going to be the proof that reform was the alternative to revolution. The unintended consequence of that was a radical reform government led by Marxist President Salvador Allende. I happened to arrive in the second year of his presidency in October of 1972, just as I missed the good part, and I just got there as things really turned south, and I was there for the military coup in 1973. Shifting my work as a journalist from a young man who thought he was going to be a foreign correspondent reporting on wonderful revolutions solving social problems, and making me somebody who spent most of my journalistic career documenting human rights violations. Chile has been a showcase not only for democracy, but for the worst of human rights crimes. 17 years of dictatorship, the first five of which I was present for, have given Chile special status, not because Chile in the Pinochet government killed more people. Certainly there are a variety of governments that that committed more atrocities, but because of the unique posture of Chile internationally, Chile got more attention for what it was doing. There was much more scrutiny. I, as a journalist, was able to publish widely and successfully, I have to say, because that was my profession, because everybody was interested in what was going on in Chile. Even as Chile was the dictatorship killed 3,478, which is the latest toll, with the new Rettig Commission report. In neighboring Argentina, 25 to 30,000 people were eliminated by the military government, which had an alliance with the Chilean military government, but much more attention was paid to Chile. Why? Well, that, from an academic and journalistic point of view, is one of the reasons that we're here. Chile is a very well-organized country in comparison to many countries in Latin America. Lowest levels of corruption. Ironically, even during the military government, you had very low levels of corruption, and you had a functioning state, you had a functioning bureaucracy, which translates into lots of documents. And much of my work has involved pursuing documents. The other part of it is the relationship with the United States. As I said, at one point the United States viewed Chile as a state interest. In other words, our national security was bound up with the fate of what was happening in Chile. When the Allende government, the Marxist government, was in power, it was perceived as our national interest to get rid of that government, and we supported the military coup. In fact, we supported 2 military coups, and the second one was successful. But bookmarking that military coup which we supported and which we perceived as which the United States government perceived as supporting our interests was the second aspect that makes Chile so prominent in the United States. In September 21st, 1976, the Chilean government carried out an act of terrorism on the streets of Washington, D.C., murdering the former ambassador, Orlando Letelier, who had been the former foreign minister of Chile during the Allende government. Perhaps the Chilean government was thinking that the United States would let them get away with that because they were such good friends. They were gravely mistaken, and the United States launched an investigation that not only interfered with that cozy relationship we had had with the dictatorship, but also led, and I've written about this extensively, to very important changes in human rights law and human rights research. Chile's human rights crimes were probably better documented by the church organization, the Vicaría de Solidaridad, than in any other country that I know of. Even, I think, coming into the present. It was an amazing work of dedication to fact. Not dedication to denunciation, but dedication to the facts of what had actually happened. Those facts gathered in the darkness of the dictatorship led eventually to hundreds, perhaps, I would say it's still in the hundreds, of judicial investigations resulting in a number of convictions of military people for human rights crimes. My second area of emphasis in my work in Chile is in journalism. Chile, for a variety of reasons, has one of the least diverse presses in all of Latin America and certainly in the world. Part of that due to the fact that Pinochet closed down every press organ that didn't agree with him, but also for a variety of reasons, and certainly the current democratic government, which came to power in 1990, is partly at fault because they did not create a climate for the diversification of media. In a democracy, that's a serious situation, and I have spent a lot of time in recent years investigating that. And because journalists get to do everything, we don't have to just research. We can actually go and organize things. So I've organized 3 publications in Chile. The first one was called APSI, a magazine created in the middle of the dictatorship. I was one of the founders of that. And then in 2006, 2007, I organized CIPER, which is a investigative journalism center. And more recently, I've organized a center for investigation called Archivos Chile. The purpose of that is to be a kind of national security archive. We use the new Chilean transparency law, the equivalent of our Freedom of Information Act, to pursue documents, many of which people said were destroyed by the military, and we are trying to prove them wrong by showing that those documents are hidden in the bowels of the bureaucracy, and many times we've been successful. And then we do investigations and analysis and papers based on that. And that's my current work. So I'll stop there, and we can talk more about that, how the Global Center might fit into that.
Very good. As you can tell from John, very absorbing country. Once you have the privilege of becoming acquainted with it. Guillermo Calvo, I turn to you, please, for your reflections.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be part of this round table. If you ask me why Chile, it's because I have lots of friends down there, number one. And even some of my best students, like Andres Velasco. So I didn't have a hard time deciding in my mind that I was very interested in Chile. But I, on the other hand, I realized that I think there is some echo.
Yeah, too close to one another, maybe. separate that. I think it's okay now.
So
Maybe it's this one.
the my field of expertise, if you wish, although expertise is a very strong word for what for my field, is international finance. So at least I have many questions about those issues. I'm not sure that I have answers. But in any case, that's a global issue. And in listening to Miguel, I realized that there are some parallels between the problems, the way you think about them in education and the financial markets. Because in financial markets, it's also important who buys the stuff. If Soros tells you that he's buying, maybe you will buy. So there are externalities of that sort which explain the kind of phenomena that we are facing these days.
I want this a little closer to you. I'm sorry. I just wanted a little closer to you.
Okay. The kind of phenomena that we are facing these days, that on day one, Monday of the week, you learn that something is fantastic going on in some part of the world, and then by the end of the week, something turned out to go the other way, and the views change completely. I think we are living in a very, very strange, difficult period, partly as scientists, because we don't have a history to rely on. I mean, the history that we have is very incomplete. Just to give you an example, we studied recoveries from these kinds of crises for many emerging markets. When in all of those episodes, a driving force, a very important driving force, were exports. Now, when you think about the US and the global economy now, exports is not a very clear way out. The US exports have not grown. The European exports as a whole have not. Okay, so that's one issue. So when you look at emerging markets, you realize that they came out of this crisis through exports, big devaluations and then exports. When you go back to the 1930s, you had the Second World War, big increase in government expenditure. Nowadays, you don't have exports as a very promising avenue. Government expenditure, as you know from the political debate, is not clear which way it's going to go, or at least if politicians do something, it will take time until they do it, and we need help right now. So the only hope from that perspective are emerging markets. And everybody talks about China's growth, and that's also very debatable, because China, the ability of China of turning around expenditure from imports to domestic or exports to domestic expenditure consumption is not easy. They don't have the market, and they have tried that, but that seems to have produced inflation. So China is limited to that. And emerging markets, when you look at what happens there, of course, if you come from the south, now it's a big fiesta going on down there. In fact, policymakers are very concerned. And now I'm going to sort of focus on Chile and Latin America in a moment. But I thought this introduction was relevant because if there is a solution of that type, where emerging markets are the pulling force, are the driving force that will help the North, the developed countries, the advanced economies, to get out of this mess, that will have to happen through imports. So imports, the other side of imports is capital inflows. Now, emerging markets are very concerned about capital inflows and trying to do something. Chile is an exception, and I'm going to refer to that. I mean, it's one of the most free market economies that we have, but already Brazil and other countries are considering putting controls on capital inflows, which is the other side of imports. I mean, if you're going to have a trade deficit, you have to have capital inflows on the other hand. So if you put controls on capital inflows, that channel will not work. Now, I'm not criticizing the emerging markets for doing that because they've been going through very painful crises in the past. So they are very worried about that channel. They are not sure that the channel is going to be stable, etc., etc. So I don't have time to elaborate on that. But the bottom line of what I'm saying is that we don't see how we are going to come out of this. As we don't see it, imagine the producer. For the producer, it's much more difficult to switch resources from sectors that don't work anymore, say real estate, to other sectors when they don't have a clear outlet. When you had exports, then the clear output was there. It was not, you didn't need a lot of imagination. Well, this is as background. Now, let me talk about Chile. Again, Chile is interesting that I'm listening from my colleagues, very similar views than the ones I have about Chile. Chile is a very serious country in Latin America. It's very transparent. So from the point of view of a researcher, that's a big plus. If I go to my country now, I don't know what the rate of inflation is, for example. In Chile, I have no doubt that there may be some errors in the second, third digit, but we have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about. So, and going back to, and also there are very serious researchers in Chile with whom you can debate, and there's a lot of activity from that point of view. Now, in addition to that, Chile is a challenging economy for the researcher, and that again I find a parallel with what Miguel said, because they've done everything by the book. I mean, they eliminated fiscal deficit. They have become net creditor to the rest of the world. I mean, they are not even debtors, they are creditors to the rest of the world. They have current account surplus, all the good things that we told, dollarization is not an issue, all the good things that we told countries to do to prevent crisis. So they've been doing relatively well. But that doesn't mean that we're unscathed from a couple of very big crises that we had in the last few years. First was the Russian crisis, and they have very big capital outflows then. And now the Lehman crisis. Now I was looking at some number, for example, Chile output fell by 1.7% in 2009 compared to only 0.6% in Brazil, and Peru still growing at 0.8%. So Chile was one of the hardest hit economies. Also from the point of view of credit, when you look at domestic credit, there was a freezing up of credit, domestic credit, which was impressive. It was one of the largest in the region, and that took everybody by surprise. Now, we don't know the answer, and this is not the place to give an answer, but by that I mean there are puzzles there, and given again the transparency of the economy, I'm sure that there is a lot that we can learn. We can study issues about the effectiveness of fiscal policy, because Chile politicians were not, policymakers were not sitting on their hands during this. The fiscal policy, I think I have the number here, fiscal deficit in Chile increased in 2009 by 8 percentage points of GDP. That's an enormous push. And however, output fell. So it's very interesting ground to check whether fiscal policy is effective. And they did all kinds of things to prevent that. So it's not that they were passive. There was no discussion about that. Andrés Velasco was able to increase government expenditure very quickly without all the debates that we are seeing here in this country, for example, and in Europe. And despite of that, output falls by almost 2%. So these are puzzling issues that require a lot of analysis, and another reason for us from Colombia to be very, very interested in looking at this case more deeply. Thank you.
Perhaps your student will have something to say about the lessons that he learned that were useful and those that were not. Andrés Velasco, by the way, whom you mentioned, Guillermo, is co-teaching a course this semester at CIPA, so we'll have a chance to ask him. Now, Nara, please, Nara Milanic, Associate Professor of History, you'll give yet another perspective on our interest in Chile. Welcome, Nara.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not making weird noises? Okay. First of all, I just wanted to address very briefly Tom's remarks about the national origins of the panelist in his opening comments. I'm not Chilean. I've spent a lot of time in Chile. However, I would like to point out that I am Croatian by extraction. So I thought that that was an important point to make about my distant national origins.
How could I forget that?
Okay. I want to address my remarks to what I think is a very obvious political, social, and economic challenge in Chile today. So obvious, in fact, that perhaps it doesn't even bear mention. But actually I think it does, and that is the issue of social inequality. Inequality is a challenge in the sense that it is a dilemma that Chile is obviously confronting today. It's also an issue in the sense that the Chilean case, I think, poses interesting questions for both scholarly research and policy rumination. I think it wouldn't be hyperbolic as a historian to say that inequality is the original sin of Latin American societies. It is arguably the intellectual puzzle, the political challenge, the ethical and moral dilemma that faces and has characterized these societies really since their founding. This is also true, arguably, I think, or maybe obviously, perhaps, of Chile today. Contemporary Chile, I think, presents something of a puzzle. And here I'm struck by the language that I have written down to use, puzzle. And puzzle is a word that Miguel used. We've also heard the word exception, showcase, Chile as showcase, Chile as exception, Chile as puzzle, recurring in many of these remarks here today. Contemporary Chile presents something of a puzzle. In that it has experienced, obviously, macroeconomic stability and growth over the last 20 years. It has experienced a remarkable decline in poverty rates, and yet inequality has remained stubbornly high. And indeed, one could argue that Chile's economic successes over the past several decades have only served to highlight this particular failing. Many of you will remember several months ago headlines around the world touting Chile as the most unequal of the member countries of the OECD. Of course, you can only be the most unequal of the OECD countries if you have joined that exclusive club in the first place. So here's an example of how success perhaps in some ways highlights problems that remain on the table. So we were asked to address this panel today based on our own disciplinary expertise. So I want to offer some brief remarks based on my perspective as a historian of Chile. Now, we usually think about inequality, obviously, as an economic problem. It's a problem most appropriately, one might say, most appropriately addressed by economic methods, economic data, and the analytic perspectives of the economic discipline. But I think we need to bear in mind that inequality is also a social and cultural puzzle, not just an economic puzzle. And it's a puzzle to which we may fruitfully apply historical, ethnographic, and humanistic perspectives and methodologies. So when I suggest that historians have something to contribute to thinking about inequality, including contemporary inequality, I don't mean to suggest that this is because inequality is somehow a timeless condition that never changes, that it's somehow indelibly coded in the DNA of Latin American societies. Rather, I would submit the opposite, that inequality is made and remade over time, that it has particular social and cultural meanings, that it has particular manifestations, and that it relies on particular mechanisms, and that those meanings and mechanisms differ across societies, and they change over time. They are not everywhere the same. So in my own research, for example, and I ask for your indulgence while I tell you one paragraph about my own specific research agenda. In my own research, I've been interested in how inequalities in modern Chile have been produced and reproduced through practices of family. So I posit that there's a relationship between public hierarchies of class and class relations on the one hand, and so-called private relations of families on the other. I focused on the late 19th and early 20th century, which is a period in Chilean history that we might characterize as one involving genealogical haves and genealogical have-nots. By genealogical halves, I'm referring to people with illustrious surnames, the Errázurices and the Larraíns, which present such challenges for the Anglophone tongue. I'm talking about people who, perhaps there's some of you in the audience with these apellidos. So I'm speaking about people who boast membership in illustrious lineages and people who enjoy the wealth, but also the social prestige, the symbolic prestige of membership in a particular kind of family. The have-nots, the genealogical have-nots in the society, on the other hand, were the astonishing number of people bereft of family, people who, because of orphanhood or migration, had no kin ties, people who, because of poverty, were not able to form families formally recognized as families in this society. And who therefore, of course, are lacking in access to the material but also symbolic resources that family engendered in this society. So in short, 19th and early 20th century Chile is a society in which inequality, or the difference between los de arriba and los de abajo, is defined, at least in part, obviously not exclusively, but in part by differential relationships to this social structure called family. So this is one, what does this have to do with anything? This is one example, I think, of how inequalities have specific cultural and historical content. And moreover, that cultural and historical content may persist over time. It may shape what comes after it. I think many of the dynamics that I was interested in the 1850s or 1930 are still palpable in Chilean society today. And I think this is what anthropologists, sociologists, and historians can contribute to discussions of inequality. So to think, we need to be thinking about different cultural iterations of inequality. The differences in the dynamics of inequality, or there are differences in the dynamics of inequality between, say, Chile and Bolivia, or Chile and the United States. And these can't be captured simply by comparing the different Gini coefficients of these countries. Gini coefficients, of course, being the typical instrument by which societal inequality is measured. So we need to be looking at history, at culture, at social context, at issues like how states operate, at law, understandings of citizenship, ethnicity, all of these complex, messy social variables that can't be, I think, summarized neatly with a Gini coefficient. So let me return to our question about pressing issues facing Chile. Chile has, for the past half-century, arguably served as a laboratory for very diverse political and economic experiments. Again, I'm using this word laboratory. I think this is one, maybe we haven't heard that particular word, but certainly that sentiment in several of the comments of other panelists. This is true of Chile's experience from 1970 to 73 as what is said to be the first, the country with the first democratically elected Marxist president in the world. This is true. Chile is a laboratory, an experiment in the 1980s when it becomes what might be called a global workshop of neoliberalism, and of course educational reform, social security reform are part of that so-called experiment. I'd like to propose that Chile in the present is, perhaps inadvertently, definitely inadvertently, a laboratory of inequality. It presents this particular configuration of economic growth and declining poverty rates coupled with intransigent inequality and persistent and palpable social hierarchies. So I think this is a scenario that begs not only economic analysis, but again also historical, ethnographic, even sociological, perhaps even psychological perspectives. And finally, of course, this is an issue that has not only profound policy relevance, but also immediate political significance in the present. Because, of course, the problems of inequities in the educational system and, by extension, in Chilean society generally are very much, or perhaps the major grievance at stake in the social ferment that is going on in Chile right now, which I'm sure will be part of our conversation afterwards. So I have some more comments about this or remarks, but I'm going to save them for the second part of our panel. Thank you.
Very good for spanning the centuries and kind of bringing it right to the present day. Thank you very much, Nara. We'll now turn to Professor Nelson Freiman of the Columbia Business School. Nelson, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here and participate in this joyous occasion, the celebration of the creation of a new Columbia Global Center in Latin America. It's first, and it will be established in Santiago de Chile. I also want to add my thanks to Andronico Luksic for making it possible. When I'm going to talk about something more micro, I'm going to talk about a program that we developed not just in Chile, but in 6 Latin American countries on entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur is a person who is willing and able to convert a new idea or an invention into a successful innovation. It's a process through which individuals identify opportunities, allocate resources, and create value. I've written some cases with large companies like the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, the retailer Zara, and also small entrepreneurial companies like Lolita, which is a women's clothing firm based in Uruguay. That's where originally I'm from. And the main difference I see between small and large companies is that many of the entrepreneurial companies fail to produce and implement a business plan. They do not know how to grow or where to grow, nor do they have a methodology for the processes to being efficient. So thinking of that, it was a few of my colleagues, we came up with the idea of a program that helps entrepreneurs to formalize some of these operational issues and at the same time help with the strategy of the company. Most policymakers and academics agree that entrepreneurship is critical to the development and well-being of society. Entrepreneurs create jobs, they drive and shape innovation, although Karen might want to differ with me currently, speeding up structural changes in the economy. By introducing new competition, they contribute indirectly to productivity. Entrepreneurship is thus a catalyst for economic growth and national competitiveness. So a group of colleagues from the engineering school, the School of International Public Affairs, where Tom is one of the colleagues that helped, and my own, the Graduate School of Business, who have an interest in Latin America, developed this unique program that we call ECLA, Emprendedores Competitivos para Latinoamérica, or Entrepreneurship of Competitors in Latin America. Same word for both. It took us a long time to come up with that acronym. To help entrepreneurs become more competitive and be successful across borders. We established an alliance with an NGO, Endeavor, that some of you probably know, that has offices in 6 Latin American countries, and took some of their impact entrepreneurs and put them through a rigorous program, month program. We're talking about puzzles, so I'll give you a puzzle for you to ponder about. We had 17 firms participate in the program that ended in January. We had 1 from Argentina, we had 2 from Colombia, we had 1 from Mexico, 4 from Brazil, 2 from Uruguay, 1 from Peru, and 6 from Chile. So the question is why? So that was the puzzle I give you. The objectives of the program is to equip the participants with educational foundation tools and resources to grow their enterprises and conduct cross-border transactions, to enable the participants to develop and implement a company improvement project with measurable results and impact, to bridge theory and practice, utilizing case discussions, guest speakers, industry coaches, and the diversity of experiences inherent in the faculty and student community that we have, to develop and hone participants' macroeconomic skills and global mindset, enabling them to capture opportunities and recognize challenges of entering the new markets, to expose participants to the business and entrepreneurship culture of a country outside of that of their region, and to establish a network of Latin American entrepreneurs, industry coaches, academics, and business leaders. So the question, how do we accomplish this? We accomplish this by this 13-month program. We bring participants from these 7 Latin American countries to Colombia for 2 weeks of intensive training, including Saturdays, and which is unlike Latin American culture, but that's, and then we give them, at the end of the 2 weeks, they have to go home and go home on 1 project. And the project is, how do I become efficient at a process of my choice? We thought we have these 2 projects that we give them. The hypothesis is, you want to compete globally, you better be good at a process of your processes. And that's the thing that we saw lacking when we're looking at entrepreneurs in general. And we assigned them a faculty advisor from Colombia to help the firm to, on a weekly basis, gather data, analyze it, and at the end of the 12 weeks, which is a semester-long project, they decide what they're going to implement, what they're going to make it better. In the middle of that, we have distance learning. We take them to, last time we took them to Korea as a spring break to look at successful entrepreneurship somewhere else, So we visited firms like Samsung and LG and small firms that are expanding. At the end of June, they're ready with the implementation of the project. We tell them, go ahead, prove it, do it, and gather data to show us impact. At the end of August, we went to Buenos Aires, we went to Instituto Torcuato Di Tella for another week of training, and the firms have to present their impact. The ones that didn't have impact had to leave. 17 firms now down to 15. The reason is just mostly lack of time. We ask them to work at least 5 hours a week during the intervening period. We give them more training, and then same thing. Project number 2, how to grow beyond borders or how to grow beyond region. That's something that continues until December. January they come back to New York for the last week. They present their growth plan to alums, venture capital, things, and we give them a certificate from Columbia, the Chase Institute. It was fairly successful. And based on the success of the inaugural year, and we have a wonderful advisory council, which we count and thank John Coatsworth for being on it. We tweaked some of the things, and we're going to do it again. But let me tell you a little bit of what, one of the things we measure, we think is important, is keep track of the impact. So the 15 companies that finish our program, we have one Chilean company, SKM Se Aprende. It's a Chilean e-learning company, decreased by 40% the process of selling, starting putting into action its business growth plan by entering the UMass market with 2 clients. That's what currently is happening. Bodytech, which is a Colombian company, they have a chain of fitness centers in Colombia, increased the retention rate in all of the segments that participate by changing its marketing process. The retention rate went from 48 to 53%, and that was the first project. Second project, the business growth plan is being implemented as we speak, with construction of 10 new centers in Peru, and they are acquiring a firm in Chile with 21 fitness centers. Lolita, this company I mentioned, was also one of the participants, a women clothing chain based in Uruguay, increased inventory turnover from 2.4 at the beginning of our program to 3.63 by December, and now they're hovering around 4. The owners are also focusing their growth plan in new countries in Latin America, reducing logistics costs and improving quality control. So this is some of the what has happened. What have we learned from the first batch? And one of the things that we learned is that there's a totally different culture between Argentines and Uruguayans and Colombians and Chileans. and that's part of the puzzle I posed at the beginning. Our hypothesis is that Argentinian Uruguayans believe they probably don't need to participate in this program as much as the Chileans or the Mexicans or Colombians. And our hypothesis is that education in our countries, I'm from Uruguay, Guillermo, is free for the most time. So they view education as an expense, while countries like Chile and Colombia and Mexico and Brazil view it as an investment. And I think that that's our hypothesis. So what's happening now with these things that we're trying to learn, I have a couple of colleagues from our B school, Maria Guadalupe, originally from Spain, who is a microeconomist, and Daniel Wolfson, who is a professor of finance, exploring that issue. So they're working with, and Daniel is working with, originally from Peru, with Endeavor Global, and Maria is working with Endeavor in Chile to try to find out what attributes will make to be, what metrics are important to make a successful entrepreneur. See, Endeavor is an outfit that we use as a filter, and we are very happy with the entrepreneurs they give us, but they reject a lot of them. In order to make, so one of the things we're exploring is does it make a difference of the ones you throw out versus the ones you don't? And this is the program that they're working, and hopefully that puzzle will be resolved. I mean, next time we do. Finally, high growth entrepreneurship is a key contributor to new employment in an economy, and national competitiveness depends on innovative and cross-border entrepreneurial ventures. And we hope that ICLA is a powerful tool in this endeavor. And I'll address the second question in a few minutes, Tom. Thank you.
Very, very much, Nelson. Thank you. Enrique Walker is not the only Chilean professor at Columbia, but he is the only one on the panel. And he is also the only one representing our Graduate School of Architecture and Architectural Preservation, which is really one of our more international schools. Enrique, the final word in this first round will be yours.
Thanks very much for the invitation as well. As an architect, my interest is Santiago, the examination of the urban condition of Santiago. 10 years ago, before coming to teach at Columbia, I taught a series of 3 architecture design studios at the University of Chile in Santiago. And these had as a goal to examine the city of Santiago through the practice of walking. The project, which is currently being edited for a small publication, entails scrutinizing the city of Santiago, particularly its metropolitan condition. At the time, Santiago was actually quite separate from the world. It's actually quite visibly so. Through the practice of walking and techniques for deliberately becoming aliens to a city which, as locals, we knew too well, and by the same token, ignored, and with a long-standing literary tradition as precedent, from Aragon to Pérec to Maspero, we looked at what we provisionally called metropolitan symptoms. In other words, conditions where one could detect a latent or a potential metropolis, which was certainly not the case at the time, so it was rather an ambition. We looked at the city through its architectures, particularly those architectures that architecture excludes from the field, what one could call the ordinary architecture. And we speculated on the future of the city through the existing city. That is, we addressed the city as an incubator for concepts about the city. The assumption, just as many of the literary precedents I just mentioned, was that the potential is contained in the actual and that the extraordinary is contained in the ordinary. Given the relentless and therefore unexpected transformations of the city over the past 10 years since the project began, the examination of Santiago has increased and intensified over the past few years, and basically it has become even more important today. Santiago as a question. Interestingly enough, we could have looked at the opening of a Columbia Global Center precisely as one of those metropolitan symptoms. It would have been a kind of a strong piece of evidence. I must also add that this is also a challenge at the local level, and indeed I'm speaking both as a local and insider and outsider. It's actually difficult to position myself in that respect. I would say that at a moment of maximum international exposure of in its history probably, of the Chilean architectural scene, still today the Chilean architectural scene remains more interested in the architectural object per se than in the way in which the architectural object acts with the city. In other words, its urban capacity. Over the past 30 years, one could say that the mainstream of the architectural debate has focused on domestic space rather than on civic and public space, and I think it has to do a lot with the question of inequality and the way in which architects operate. The city and the formulation of an architecture which is by definition urban, and by the same token an urbanism that is architectural, is still a pending challenge for the debate in Chile. I would say that any architectural project, regardless of its scale, implies a concept about the city. Therefore, that is precisely the ultimate potential and social and transformative capacity of architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Thank you very much. I'd pause to take a breath here. Dean Provost has authorized me to say that with students in the room, if you'll do the required reading and submit a paper, you get 1.5 credit for the introduction, of course, on the introduction to Chile, which I can't imagine to have been broader and, in fact, inspiring. So I want to thank you. Just a moment on organization. Let the panel catch this breath. They're going to go for a second round of questions. We're joined by a few other faculty members. I want to send a message to them who've joined us late. Some of them couldn't come from class soon enough to be here at the table, but what I'll do is I'll go through our second round of, and then I'll call on Professor Modi and others who have joined us and ask for their comments and reactions. But I do want to finish the second part of the panel, which will be necessarily somewhat abbreviated. I don't think anyone will necessarily object to that, but those of us anxious to know, starting with you, Miguel Occhiola, maybe going back in the same order in which we've just proceeded down the table, what difference does it make to you that, in blunt terms, what a global center can do in terms of advancing this agenda and creating in that two-way communication your field of interest, your colleagues in Chile, Columbia University? Miguel, I'll start with you.
Right. So this is somewhat difficult, more difficult to answer, of course, since we haven't seen the center in operation. But I clearly think that there would seem to be lots of potential there. I think that let me emphasize three things. One is I think that the center would help, for example, relate the research that different people at Columbia are doing on Chile or with Chileans dealing with the reality of the country. Just listening to this panel has been quite interesting and you know, is sort of thought-provoking and makes me think I should have lunch with some of my colleagues. A second thing I think would be that all of us have emphasized that Chile is so interesting. It's certainly very interesting to all of us, and we've worked a lot on it. It remains understudied. I actually think certainly, you know, for the types of issues I'm interested in, and so I'm constantly trying to push PhD and master students to basically do a little bit more work there. And I think that the center could be quite useful to that. That if there's some infrastructure that basically says, you know, this is where you land, and there you will meet other graduate students who are doing this type of thing and help get contacts going. That would also be quite useful. And then finally, and more tentatively, maybe if the center could serve as a place for Chilean universities to also interact with Columbia. That happens for our cases already. We have co-authors. I would guess all of us in Chile, but basically providing a forum for that type of interaction might be also useful.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Lisa.
Yeah, I think those are some very good comments, and I would agree with those also. Additionally, I think, you know, given the interdisciplinary nature of the work, well, also across disciplines at Columbia, it would be helpful for also informing the various research that we do at Columbia. What are the pressing issues? What are the research opportunities? As I understand it, Karen has strong governmental ties in the region, and being able to bring awareness to the agencies beyond the university would be helpful as well. Certainly, you know, we've had at IRI very good interactions with the universities there, and I do see having a global center as an opportunity to collaborate more strongly with the universities in that country and throughout the region, creating sort of small constellations of researchers that can draw in funding opportunities, again, in the country, regionally and internationally, and also providing possible mechanisms for students and visiting scientists to come to Columbia and participate in the work that we do.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Tala. Karen has wisely decided to tape these, the whole session, but these valuable suggestions in particular will be paying close attention to in the transcript. John Dingus.
Well, I had two ideas. I'm not sure whether we can do these, but these are things that I think need to be done. The first is to maybe the Global Center would be a way to stimulate private nonprofit activity in a country in which it's almost completely absent. In Chile, partly growing out of the inequality, social inequality situation that Nara was talking about, as many things grow out of, you have on the part of the government the attitude that if the government doesn't control it, it's not going to support it. And on the part of the private sector, where you have interesting political dynamics between right, center, and left, you have the attitude that if I don't control it, or if it's going to get out of my the control, if it's not going to reflect my personal agenda, then I'm not going to give money to it. In other words, you give money only to activities that you are able to control and that you predictably assume will reflect your personal agenda. Now, that I think, in a country that has such a developed democracy with all of its unevenness, the lack of that civic, independent, nonprofit sector is a tremendous lack. And I think things like the Global Center, with the unique interaction between Chilean actors and those of us researchers and writers coming from the outside, you have the opportunity to introduce new ideas that if we were waiting for the Chileans themselves, even given the high quality of their universities, to introduce them, they wouldn't happen. Innovation in Chile, while it happens, there are certain areas in which it seems that there are real trabas, there are real obstacles to moving beyond accepted conventional wisdom, and this would be one of them. And the second area that I think is ripe for activity of this kind is in the field of journalism and media. And I distinguish between journalism and media, media being those who own the means of communication, the journalists, those who actually write the articles and produce the material that's communicated to people. The problem of media diversity, which is extreme in Chile, is not going to be solved by media owners. And as a result, media workers, journalists, are very much, I would say, almost subjugated, certainly so dependent that it's very difficult for them to even speak out. And one of the ideas we had at the journalism school is we've been trying to set up a program in Chile that just happened to coincide with the existence and the launching of the Global Center, and that was to create a think tank in Chile for looking at Latin American media industry problems and crises. Certainly the media industry in the United States is already in crisis. It's not yet arrived in Latin America, and the process of thinking through these problems would provide the opportunity to avoid the extremes of the media crisis that we have here in the United States, particularly affecting newspapers, and allowing a more fruitful transition to the new digital world of journalism without having to go through this tremendous destruction that we've had in the industry in the United States. So I think that that's something that would be a fruitful area of activity. Chile is well positioned because of its prestige in many areas. Although you can't necessarily assume that if it comes from one country, anybody else is going to listen to it. So you have to be very careful in doing something regional to make sure that it's very ecumenical.
Thank you very, very much, John. And the great efficiency of the panelists, I applaud too. Guillermo, please, your thoughts.
Okay, no,
build it and they will come. But
I find myself in full agreement with what John said. I sometimes find that in Chile the discussion is very local, somewhat too provincial. I was surprised once when I went there, and there was a big fight between economists about because the central bank had risen the rate of interest by 0.25%. That for the rest of Latin America is like zero. So it was a 0.25 group and the 0.20 group, and they were fighting like dogs to one another, which is very fruitful undoubtedly, but you felt that there was a disconnect with the region, and it turned out that with some of the things that now the policymakers are facing these days, which is unfortunately they go beyond those minutiae. Now, in terms of the center, I find it very important that the creation of a center which has a global outlook, because otherwise, we have very few centers. In fact, it's very hard to find names. There are very good centers in Latin America, like FEDesarrollo in Colombia, FIEL in Argentina, but they tend to look at their own countries. When I work at the IDB, we made an effort to promote studies that looked across the region, and that turned out to be very fruitful. Because by doing that, that's one of the concerns that John was raising, at the very least, you are depoliticizing some issues. If you are discussing, for example, what to do with capital inflows, and you just focus on one country, there is a tendency to bring up all kinds of issues that could be relevant from a political point of view, but perhaps they distract you from what is essential from an economic point of view. When you look at several experiences at the same time, you have sometimes some common factors, and you realize that it doesn't depend so much on the local things that tend to be emphasized because of the political struggle. I found that very productive in our experience at IDB. So that alone, I think, is going to be a big plus, because we don't have private institutions that would do that job in Latin America. Now, in that respect, there are things going on that this center can take advantage of. For example, we have LACEA, the Latin American and Caribbean Economic Association, that sponsors networks. And we have a network, and these are across, looking at issues that are of relevance across different countries in Latin America. There is a summer program in international finance that has been meeting for more than 10 years very successfully, not only with researchers in the region, but from outside the region, very, very respected, and it's a highly regarded program. LACEA also has another network on crime issues that very fittingly is called Al Capone. And it means something, but I forget now. But maybe, and there is another one on income distribution and poverty issues, which I believe is going to meet here very soon at Columbia. So those activities so far are being done under the umbrella of LACEA. Now, LACEA is a very large institution with many members, and that's sort of a branch of the institution, of this association. But I think the center could take advantage by sponsoring some of these activities and multiplying the effect across the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Guillermo. Nara.
Thank you. So let me give one concrete proposal or proposal for the new center, which I hope in turn suggests a guiding principle for the kinds of themes and issues that the center might fruitfully address. So in keeping with my previous comments, I would love to see the center organize an international interdisciplinary conference that addresses the theme of inequality in Chile, in Latin America, and in the world. And I realize that I may be preaching to the converted in this regard, because in conversations with Karen, she's actually mentioned that, in fact, this theme is on the agenda already of the center. But it seems to me worth bearing in mind that Chile is a logical place, I think, for a sustained and serious exploration of this issue for precisely the reasons that I gave before. And I'd further like to add that inequality is a particularly timely and appropriate topic for Colombia's new center in Santiago, not just because of Chilean realities, but also because of North American realities. We know that income inequality has worsened in this country, in the United States, significantly since the 1980s. And we know furthermore that New York City is the single most maldistributed or unequal city and community in this country. On that score, I think it's worth pointing out a headline that appeared in the journalistic site The Huffington Post last year. And that site said, that headline said, "New York's income inequality worse than in Chile." So lest we be accused of casting stones in glass houses, I think we would be advised to think about the fact that this kind of issue is one that affects not just Chile, but the United States. So in other words, I think the center should think about this particular problem, not just as a Chilean problem, but as a North American problem. And indeed, it strikes me in this instance and in others that the so-called problems of subdesarrollo, of underdevelopment, are in fact the problems also of modernity. So on that score, and broadening out from the specific issue to, I think, a guiding principle for the center in general, I think that there are a whole series of common issues and debates beyond inequality that the center could be thinking about. The other obvious one that comes to mind, and I'm sure we can come up with many others, is the issue of the role of the state in the economy and the state and society. Once again, of course, Chile offers a sort of a workshop of sorts, a showcase, a laboratory of sorts for precisely these issues. And I think it's interesting to think about the fact that the student movement in Chile right now is thinking a lot and talking about, in Chilean society is talking a lot about the role of what should be the role of the state in the educational system and in society. It's interesting to compare that, I think, to the Tea Partiers in the United States, coming from a very different ideological position, but thinking about precisely the same issue of the role of the state in society. So I think that the Columbia Center in Santiago is really in a unique position to pick up on common challenges, on issues of hemispheric resonance, and to generate some serious, high-quality transnational dialogues about these kinds of broad issues that confront multiple, ostensibly very different societies today.
Thank you very much, Nara. Now quickly I'll turn to Nelson.
Thank you, Tom. I think if I summarize what we're trying to say, is that we don't want the center in Chile to do things local, but do it to become either a regional hub of something. There won't be any centers in Latin America, probably other than Brazil and Mexico, so Chile has to become a region. And in that regard, I think Chile could become the center of excellence for executive education programs, locally. I mean, in collaboration with SIPA, Engineering School, Earth Institute, or whatever, I mean, just to do that. Center for Excellence in Entrepreneurship. Propagation of knowledge in areas related to mining and natural resources that is not just reside in Chile. So those are things in regional, but I'm going to give you two specific things that are local that I think are important, could be important as well. One of the things that we should make is make the centers, global centers, different from any other global center that other universities have as well. And one of them is to provide something for our undergrad board. And one of the things that has been done, I think, successful by a center in Jordan is something that is to look at, they had a program for summer ecosystem experience for undergraduates. I think something similar will not be very hard to duplicate in Santiago when you have these marvelous natural resources, either from the desert all the way to Antarctica, that few other countries can replicate. I'll give you another specific initiative that is good for Chile as well, or good for, to do locally, is that utilize the engaging power of soccer that we're all very familiar with and love to work on health and formal education for students in K-12. I think one of the things we can do is use this center to help communities other at the graduate or university level. Focusing on science, technology, and math, that we can then, Colombia can leverage what we have in this educational approach to this sport universality to better connect with the international community. I think it's something can be done in each of our centers, certainly Chile, where soccer is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Enrique.
Yeah, again, speaking as an insider and an outsider, I mean, what both Colombia could do to Santiago and Santiago could do to Colombia, I basically would stage, that is curate, kind of an active, ongoing, broad disciplinary discussion, debate on the city in the form of lectures, conferences, and seminars. On the one hand, to kind of intensify the debate on the city, which would have an extraordinary effect on the local debate. But also, for Colombia, I think it would be interesting as an experiment to chart the process through which a city like Santiago becomes global. In other words, it starts acting globally by virtue of the rhetorical act of calling it global.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to, a word of organization before we thank this wonderful panel. I did ask a couple of professors to respond. Professor Levin of the School of Education was going to be here. He's not here today. But Professor Vijay Modi is Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Director of Infrastructure Program for Millennium Villages Project, is here. Professor, I'm going to kind of short circuit a lot of the debate that I was going to have because we're almost out of time, but you weren't able to come because of prior commitments, but we did want to welcome you to maybe to make a reaction, maybe add a point of view of your own, representing your own interests in engineering and in the Earth Institute. Sure. If you could speak into the mic, it would be best. And then we'll finish with this.
I'm from India. Chile could not be further away geographically. But when I was a graduate student, I met a very good Chilean friend, and then we started to work together. He was an electrical engineer from UCLA. He ended up going back to Santiago, so I continued our collaboration. That's what brought me to Chile first. And this was 88, 89, so a while ago. But I found that something very interesting, that that the industry as well as government was open to engineering ideas, and that was very, that kind of openness to think about. We were working on decision support systems for the mining industry. And the other thing was that, this colleague of mine moved and started to teach at the university there, and there was a real appreciation and into intellectual applied math issues that I found very refreshing. So there was no, so that allowed engineers and applied math to occur. And so I think that there is a real interest in working on the applied math side. Now the specific issue that I'm interested in, and Professor Lal, who I work with, so to represent the water center issues, is that that Chile might have some very interesting, opportunities with wind and hydro when it is married together. Just to give an example, that Denmark's wind would kind of not be as effective without Scandinavian topography. So it takes the mountains and having reservoirs both upstream, downstream to make it cost effective. And Chile potentially has that puzzle to be solved, and it may very well, talking about the theme of puzzles, that there may be very interesting possibilities to make a sort of state-of-the-art operation and to make wind, so use the heft of wind to make hydropower very effective. So that's some of the thoughts.
That's a wonderful way to conclude with yet another thought. The faculty members, by virtue of their presence, have agreed implicitly to be part of a faculty advisory committee for the Global Center to help us implement these very good ideas. And I know that they will gladly and willingly serve, and we will be inspired, as we were this morning, by their presence, by their commitment, and by their very good and practical ideas. So I'm not certain how exactly it ended, except I know those doors in the back are going to come open, and there'll be a buffet lunch, and everyone is invited. The Andronico Luxic and President Lee Bollinger, hosted by our Provost John Colesworth, will take over from this point. But I know you feel, I don't know if you feel as appreciative as I am, but I know you feel all very, very appreciative of the diversity of talents and ideas gathered here, and how it well augurs for the future of our Global Center. So please join with me in thanking my faculty colleagues, urge them to continue to their efforts and to continue to be involved with the Santiago Global Center. Thank you very, very much, my friends.